Hello everybody, welcome back to another edition of the EcoStruxure Machine Expert Training. I'm your host, Leandro Ahumada, and in this video what we're going to see is the trigger functionality that we have for the trace. So let's go to the presentation. So in the past video we saw how to make all of the configuration for our trace, okay? We leave behind the trigger option, so that's going to be the main focus here. So the trace, we already see what it's used for, but the trigger allows us to set the amount of samples that I'm going to trace after the trigger. Okay, so if we want to see a specific situation that we have in our controller and we want to record the data, we can specify the trigger and then what's going on to many samples before after that. Okay, so in order to enable the trigger, we just need to go to the trace, open the configuration part, and then enable the trace, the trigger. Once you enable the trigger, it will ask you to assign a variable over there. Okay, let's just hide myself. Use a variable over there for the trigger. Okay, you can find on the input system, and then you can define the trigger edge. Okay, and you can also define, okay, if the variable to trigger is not a boolean, you can specify a trigger level, okay, in order to adjust the trigger. Okay, so that is how you can use it. Okay, so once you have defined the trigger variable and how, if it's boolean, how it's going to be, positive edge, negative edge, or both, okay, you can specify the amount of samples that you're going to record after this trigger. Okay, so what we're going to do, okay, we're going to open the previous application that I have done, okay, just to see how the variable is increasing. Two variables are increasing after the other one, okay, and using an additional variable called xTrigger trace in order to enable the trigger. Okay, so we're going to do that here. So if we open our application here, okay, let's try to connect with the controller. Hopefully it's on. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is to download the trace that I have. Okay, there we go. One thing that probably I didn't mention yesterday is that if you configure this part, okay, it will change the amount of information you can see. So if you reduce this 9 seconds, okay, you can see that this is the information that we're going to see over here, the amount of samples. Okay, cursor here. Okay, and you can see that almost the 10 seconds. You can see here in this part, okay, you can see almost the 10 seconds of the samples. If you want to increase that value, you just go to advanced and start increasing this part. Okay. Okay, and then download the trace, and you can see now it's going to be higher than those seconds that I showed you before. Okay, that's something that probably I forgot to mention yesterday. So what we're going to do now, okay, to stop this, is add a new variable over here, which should be the trigger, so we have an idea of what is going to be executed. So in our program, I have the trigger variable over here, the one that I have already I have commented this one yesterday. Okay, I have created over here the boolean, and here it's going to be true as soon as this one is reached the 100, and then I'm going to as soon as the second variable reach the number 5, it will went to false again. So let's start by adding a new diagram here. So here are the variables that we are using. I'm going to add a new diagram over here. Add diagram. Okay. Here the axis. As this variable is going to be boolean, okay. One thing that I do or usually do is to focus on the minimum and maximum values. In this case, -1 and the 2. so I can see something similar to this one, which is the blink. So I know it's going to be in the middle, the value that I have. Description, this is going to be trigger, and font, bold 14, trigger. Here the variables. If you had another variable, you can put it over here, but in my case I'm going to add a new one. Here it's going to be the trace, the trigger trace, and then that's it basically. So okay, so what I have done now is to just connect to the controller. What I have done so far is to add the variable of the trigger just to see it on the diagram. That's all. I haven't done anything special now. So far the same as before. It has number 1. Probably we need to wait a few seconds just to show you the value when it reached the number 0. Okay, just wait for it. It's gonna be faster. Okay, it's almost 10 seconds, okay, between the different changes on the status, okay, more or less. So it's going to be 0 now, okay. So what we can do now is to add the configuration for the trigger. Here I'm going to use the value for the trigger, this one, the one that I have used here on the trace. Okay, and here you can specify the amount of samples. Okay, so if I specify 500, it's gonna be almost at the middle of the ramp. Okay, the mast, and that's it. So let's just download the trace just in case. So right now the value trigger is in 1. It's not going to trigger anything because I need the rise in order to focus. So now, as soon as this one changes status, it will trigger the trace, and it will cut at the middle of the ramp. You can see here this line, okay, is a trigger, and you can see that it has a stop. Okay, so if we pay attention here, okay, approximately this is the line. Then another cursor over here. Okay, you can see there is almost the 5 seconds, which is almost the middle, which is almost the thing that we have already defined. Okay, so this is how you can make the trigger. Okay, trigger is the trace is a useful tool, and we should be able to use it easily. Okay, you can see it will depend on your preference how you want to see the data, the colors and everything, but it's a useful tool. Okay, so trace, we have already seen in the previous video how to configure everything. Okay, and now the enable trigger, so we can record a specific amount of samples after the trigger. Okay, so this is it for the trace plus the trigger feature that we have for the trace. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I see you on the next one.